Mustang hardtop. Mach 1.
Great feel of the road, Monte Carlo gives you. Monte Carlo.
Car of tomorrow, today.
They were loud, raw, and unapologetically powerful. Machines that rumbled down the street like thunder and made every kid turn their head in awe. What happened to the muscle cars that once defined freedom, rebellion, and pure American horsepower? The 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle SS 454 was not just a muscle car. It was a factory-built monster that growled with authority the second you touched the gas. At the heart of it was the LS6 engine, a big block brute that delivered 450 horsepower straight off the assembly line. That was unheard of at the time. It was raw, brutal torque packed into a mid-sized body that looked like it was always in motion, even when parked. The dual stripes, the cowl induction hood, and the rumble from those chrome-tipped exhaust pipes made the Chevelle impossible to ignore. It was the kind of car that made your palms sweat just sitting in the driver's seat. Quarter-mile times were legendary, and this car did not care about finesse. It was about dominance. People who drove it felt like kings, and those who lined up next to it at a red light, they usually regretted it. The Chevelle SS 454 was the kind of car you saved all summer to buy, all winter to fix, and never stopped bragging about. It represented the peak of American muscle, before the rules changed and the power faded. Today, it is not just missed, it is worshipped. The 1971 Plymouth Hemi-Cuda was not just a car, it was a threat on wheels. With its legendary 426 Hemi engine under the hood, it delivered over 400 horsepower with a sound that shook the pavement. It had attitude baked into every inch. The shaker hood screamed aggression before the engine even turned over. The blackout grille, the wild colors, the billboard stripes, all of it said one thing loud and clear. This car was not here to play nice. It was one of the rarest, meanest machines ever built, and only a handful were made, making each one a piece of street-legal treasure. It had a presence that pulled attention like gravity. At car shows or quarter-mile strips, the Hemi-Cuda always stood out. Drivers knew they had something special, and the competition knew it too. But the Cuda was more than muscle. It was a symbol of what American cars once dared to be: loud, fast, and built for no one's approval. Today, it is one of the most sought-after classics on Earth, not just for its speed, but for what it stood for. This was the moment before the rules caught up, when raw power still had the last word. The 1970 Dodge Challenger RT was built to make a statement, and it did so with every inch of its wide, aggressive stance. It was long, low, and mean. The kind of car that filled up a parking space like it owned the whole lot. What made the RT special was not just the way it looked, it was the way it moved. With an optional 4406 pack under the hood, this car packed serious heat. That setup meant 3 two-barrel carburetors working together to turn fuel into fury. And the result? Tire-melting acceleration and a deep rolling thunder that echoed down the block. The Challenger offered more than just straight-line speed, though. Inside, it was plush and roomy, with options galore: bucket seats, rally gauges, a pistol grip shifter. It felt like luxury until you floored it. Then it felt like war. In high school parking lots, this was the dream car. Posters on walls, drawings in notebooks. A Challenger RT meant you were somebody. Even now, decades later, that feeling has not faded. If anything, it has grown, because they do not make muscle like this anymore. They just do not. The 1970 Pontiac GTO Judge was loud, brash, and unapologetically bold. It was not just a muscle car, it was a declaration. With its outrageous color schemes, massive decals, and raucous engine growl, the Judge made sure nobody missed its arrival. Under the hood, it packed the Ram Air 3 or the optional Ram Air 4 V8, both offering blistering performance. The name itself came from a comedy routine, but the car was dead serious. It was built for the young, the wild, and the fearless. And it delivered. It could tear down a quarter mile with ease, and the handling was tight enough to carve corners without flinching. Every inch of the Judge was designed to turn heads, from the Endura front bumper to the rear spoiler. It shouted muscle in a world where cars were starting to play it safe. And while the GTO had already earned its reputation by the late 1960s, the judge pushed it into mythic territory. This was the version everyone remembers. This was the one people still talk about. It was performance wrapped in personality, and personality wrapped in power. Today, the judge is missed not just because of how it drove, but because of what it represented, the height of muscle car confidence before everything got quieter. The 1971 AMC Javelin AMX was America's underdog muscle car, and it fought hard to earn its place in the pack. While the Big Three dominated the spotlight, AMC carved out a space with grit, clever design, and genuine performance. The Javelin AMX looked unlike anything else on the road: long hood, short deck, and aggressive lines that hinted at speed even at a standstill. Underneath that bold exterior was serious hardware. With the right setup, it came with a 401 cubic inch V8 that pushed over 300 horsepower. The Javelin was not just about power, though. It had a racing pedigree. AMC took it to NASCAR, and it won championships. That connection gave the AMX a street cred few others could match. Inside, it felt like a proper driver's car, tight, focused, and surprisingly refined. But what made the AMX special was not just the numbers, it was the attitude. It had something to prove, and it did, over and over. Today, it is one of those forgotten heroes of the muscle car era. Not as flashy, not as famous. But for those who know, it holds a special kind of respect. It was the car that punched above its weight and left a dent in muscle car history. The 1970 Ford Mustang Boss 302 was a race car in disguise. Built to qualify for Trans-American racing, it had to follow strict engine size rules. But that did not stop Ford from turning it into a legend. With its high-revving 302 cubic inch V8 and close ratio 4-speed gearbox, the Boss 302 was built to scream. It was not the fastest in a straight line, but that was not the point. It was all about handling, quick corners, tight turns, track precision in a street-ready package. The Boss 302 had a unique look too. Blacked-out hood, bold stripes, rear window slats, and a front chin spoiler that made it look fast just standing still. Inside, it was all business. No frills, just function. It was made for the road, but born for the circuit. And while the Mustang had plenty of wild variations over the years, the Boss 302 stood out as the one that proved muscle could be smart. It was power with discipline, noise with control. Today, it remains one of the most beloved Mustangs ever built, a reminder that true performance does not always come from brute force alone. The 1971 Buick GSX Stage 1 was the kind of muscle car that wore a tie to the fight and still knocked you out in the first round. Buick had a reputation for smooth, luxurious rides, cars built for long cruises and quiet comfort. But the GSX flipped that script without tearing it up. Under the hood sat the Stage 1 455 cubic inch V8, a torque-heavy powerhouse that quietly outperformed some of the loudest names in the game. With well over 500 pound-feet of torque, it could flatten your spine at a stoplight. Yet it did all this without screaming for attention. The GSX came in two standout colors, Saturn Yellow and Apollo White, both with bold racing stripes, rear spoilers, and blacked-out grills. It looked sharp, not showy. Inside, it was all Buick. Soft bucket seats, full instrumentation, and just enough wood trim to remind you that you were not in a stripped-down street racer. But when you dropped the hammer, everything changed. It was fast, refined, and completely intimidating when it needed to be. The GSX Stage 1 did not need gimmicks. It was a high-class assassin on wheels. Today, it is remembered as one of the most underrated muscle cars of the era. It proved that luxury and performance were not opposites, and that a little elegance could still tear up the pavement when the time was right. Sometimes the real threat is the one that stays quiet until you are already in the rear view. The 1970 Oldsmobile 442W30 was a muscle car for people who knew exactly what they wanted. It was not flashy like some of its competitors. It did not have wild graphics or over-the-top styling. What it had was performance, pure, deliberate performance. The W30 package meant a ram air hood, fiberglass scoops, high-output camshaft, and serious internal upgrades. Under the hood sat a 455 cubic inch V8 that churned out brutal torque and ran hard through every gear. This was a street fighter in a suit. It looked mature, but underneath it was itching for a race. The 442 was all about balance. Power, sure, but also control. The suspension was tight. The brakes were solid. It felt like a full package, not just an engine with doors. And the W30 took all of that to the next level. Today, it is one of the most respected names in the muscle car world, not because it shouted the loudest, but because it delivered, day in, day out. For those who knew, it was the one to beat, and for those who drove one, it was never forgotten. The 1973 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am S D455 was a final roar before the silence. By the early 1970s, emissions rules, fuel prices, and insurance rates were all tightening the noose around muscle cars. But Pontiac pushed back. Hard. The Super Duty 455 engine was a masterpiece, hand-assembled, high compression, and packed with race-ready components. It was the most powerful engine of its time, hidden under the screaming chicken decal and aggressive bodywork. The Trans Am was still loud, still fast, still fighting. It had all the style, wheel flares, shaker hood, rear spoiler, and the strength to back it up. This was not a car built for compromise. It was built as a final statement, one last stand for raw American horsepower before the curtain dropped. Drivers who got their hands on one knew they were holding a piece of history even then. And today, it is seen as one of the last true muscle cars of the golden era. The SD455 was not just an engine. It was a farewell letter written in burnt rubber and roaring exhaust. The 1971 Dodge Charger Super Bee was not built for subtlety. It was built to roar. With its aggressive stance, bold graphics, and unmistakable bulging hood, this muscle car was a rolling declaration of speed and attitude. It wore its name proudly, and for good reason. Under the hood, drivers could choose from a range of powerhouse engines, including the legendary 426 Hemi and the 446 pack, both capable of turning a straight road into a thrill ride. The styling was pure drama: twin-scooped hoods, eye-searing color options, and side stripes that made it look fast even when parked. Inside, it was all business, with rally gauges, bucket seats, and a driver-focused layout that made you feel like a street racer even on a grocery run. Though it only lasted 1 year in the Charger body, the 1971 Super Bee still stands as a snapshot of the muscle car era at full throttle. It was loud, flashy, and unapologetically wild, a car that never asked for attention but always got it. Decades later, when one passes by, people still stop and stare, drawn to its raw energy and rebellious spirit. The Super Bee never faded. It just kept buzzing. The 1970 Mercury Cougar Eliminator was muscle in a tuxedo. It shared its bones with the Ford Mustang but added a touch of class to the chaos. Longer, smoother, and wrapped in a bit more chrome, the Cougar looked refined, but do not let that fool you. Under the hood, the Eliminator meant business. It came standard with a 428 Cobra Jet V8, and if you dared, you could option it up to the Boss 302. The performance was there, the sound was there, and the looks? Pure attitude with a split front grille and signature hidden headlights that gave it a stealthy stare. The Eliminator package added stripes, spoilers, and a dash of NASCAR spirit, giving this sophisticated ride a proper snarl. Inside, it was plush. Vinyl seats, wood accents, and a clean dash reminded you this was still Mercury, still about comfort and elegance. But hit the gas and the rear tires would sing. This was a car that could cruise quietly down a boulevard 1 minute and blow the doors off a rival the next. The Mercury Cougar Eliminator was proof that you could have power without losing poise, and today it is remembered as the muscle car that wore a suit but never backed down from a fight. The 1970 Chrysler 300 Hearst was what happened when brute force shook hands with pure luxury. Built in collaboration with Hearst Performance, this was not your average muscle machine. It was a heavyweight brawler wearing gold-trimmed gloves. With only a few hundred made, it was rare right from the start. Under the hood sat a 440 cubic inch TNT V8 that churned out enough torque to peel the asphalt off the road, and yet the 300 Hearst was long, wide, and unapologetically plush. The signature white and gold paint job with fiberglass hood scoops and a deck lid spoiler announced its arrival with style. Hearst badges made sure no one mistook it for a soft cruiser. Inside, the car was pure Chrysler comfort, big seats, sweeping dash, and enough room to stretch your legs like you were in a first-class cabin. It was heavy, sure, but it moved like it had something to prove. This was not about finesse. It was about showing that luxury could still throw a punch. Today, the Chrysler 300 Hearst lives in the shadows of more famous muscle cars, but those who know it revere it. It was the kind of car you took to a business meeting in the morning and raced after sundown. The 1972 Chevrolet Camaro Z28 was the muscle car that refused to bow down, even as the world around it started to change. The second-generation Camaro brought sleeker lines, a longer body, and a lower profile, but the heart of the Z28 was still all about power. Under the hood lived a high-revving 350 cubic inch V8, pushing performance that thrilled both on the street and the strip. It was a car that looked more grown up, but still picked fights like it was 17. The front split bumper gave it a snarling face, and the cowl induction hood let everyone know it was not here to play games. The suspension was tight, and the handling was better than most expected from a muscle car. Inside, it was stripped down and focused, a space designed for driving, not lounging. And while emissions regulations were creeping in, the Z28 still found a way to deliver. It may not have shouted as loud as the earlier models, but it whispered confidence. Today, the 72 Z28 is often overlooked, but true enthusiasts remember it as the Camaro that carried the muscle torch just a little farther into the future. The 1971 Plymouth Roadrunner with the 446-barrel setup was a cartoon come to life, with claws. Everyone remembers the beep-beep horn, the playful badging, and the Looney Tunes reference. But behind the laughs was a serious machine that packed a punch. With a trio of two-barrel carburetors feeding the massive 440 cubic inch V8, this version of the Roadrunner had the kind of instant, pavement-tearing power that made your stomach drop. It was bare bones, loud, and proud. Everything about it screamed fun, but the kind of fun that left rubber burned into the road. The styling was sharp for 71, new body lines, a menacing grille, and that unmistakable air grabber hood. Inside, it was Spartan because luxury was not the point. This car was about sound, speed, and simplicity. It had a joy to it, like it wanted to be driven hard and rewarded those who did. The Roadrunner was the muscle car that did not take itself too seriously, and that is why people loved it. Today, it is remembered as a car that brought a grin to your face and a growl to your ears, delivering horsepower with humor. The 1974 Ford Gran Torino Sport had style, swagger, and a touch of television magic. Thanks to the red and white paint job made famous by Starsky and Hutch, it became one of the most recognizable cars of the decade. But even without the Hollywood spotlight, this car had plenty to offer. Under the hood, you could get a 402 or 460 cubic inch V8, engines that moved this big-bodied beauty with surprising authority. The Gran Torino Sport was heavy, but it could hustle. Its long, wide stance gave it a presence that was hard to ignore, and the fastback roofline gave it a sporty edge. It was part muscle, part personal luxury, and all confidence. Inside, the Gran Torino offered comfort that bordered on opulence. Big seats, soft surfaces, and a dash that wrapped around the driver like a cockpit. It was not a lightweight racer, but it had character. Lots of it. Today, the Gran Torino Sport is often remembered more for its screen time than its performance, but fans of the car know better. It had the muscle, it had the look, and it carried itself with the kind of laid-back strength only the 70s could deliver. The 1970 Dodge Coronet RT looked like a brawler, and it acted like one too. With its split grille that resembled a set of flared nostrils, it had one of the most aggressive faces of any car from the muscle era. This was not a car trying to charm you, it was daring you to challenge it. And under the hood, it had the muscle to back up that attitude. Most came with the 440 Magnum, but for those who wanted to push it, the mighty 426 Hemi was also an option. Either way, the Coronet RT was a straight-line menace. It was built for speed, with quarter-mile domination in its DNA. But what really made it stand out was its combination of menace and simplicity. No gimmicks, no cartoons, just a bold, brash machine that meant business. Inside, it was all muscle, basic gauges, tough materials, and a shifter ready for action. The Coronet RT may not have had the glamour of a Charger or the cult following of a Challenger, but it had respect. Lots of it. Today, it is a rare sight, but one that still turns heads and raises eyebrows, because real muscle does not need to be pretty, it just needs to hit hard. The 1973 De Tomaso Pantera was a muscle car by powertrain, but an exotic by blood. This Italian-designed, American-powered beast was the wild card of the muscle car deck. At its core was a Ford 351 Cleveland V8, mid-mounted behind the driver for perfect balance and wicked performance. It looked like a Ferrari, sounded like a thunderstorm, and drove like nothing else on the road. Sharp angles, low stance, and a wide body gave it supercar vibes. But the Pantera had the brutal punch of good old American muscle. It was raw and exotic at the same time, built to go fast and look dangerous doing it. Ford sold the Pantera through Lincoln Mercury dealerships, making it the most exotic thing you could buy with a warranty in the early 70s. But it was not perfect. Fit and finish were spotty, and some owners complained about overheating. Still, when it ran right, the Pantera was nothing short of spectacular. It was a high-speed, high-style experiment that paid off in presence if not in polish. Today, it is one of the most unique cars of its time, a cross-continental marvel that brought two car cultures crashing together under one sheet of steel. The 1970 Ford Torino Cobra was the kind of muscle car that did not need to shout. It waited until your guard was down, then roared to life. At a glance, it looked almost reserved. No wild stripes, no cartoon graphics, just clean, sweeping lines and a low, powerful stance. But the moment you popped the hood, everything changed. Sitting inside was the 429 Cobra Jet, a high-compression V8 that breathed through a shaker scoop and delivered jaw-dropping power. This engine was built for business. It launched the Torino down quarter-mile tracks with a force that caught plenty of rivals by surprise. The suspension was tuned for aggression, the frame was strong, and the rear tires were often left smoking. But what truly made the Torino Cobra special was how it carried that muscle. It was not flashy. It was focused. It had the vibe of a quiet brawler in a tailored suit. Inside, the cabin was wide and comfortable, with just enough muscle car flair to remind you what you were driving. No gimmicks, no nonsense. It was made for serious drivers who wanted big power without the noise of a show car. Today, the Torino Cobra is remembered as one of the great sleepers of its era, a car that looked calm until your right foot woke it up. It was a heavyweight, dressed in silence, a reminder that real power does not need to brag, it just needs to be unleashed. The 1971 Chevrolet Monte Carlo SS454 was the kind of car that blended power and poise in a way few others dared. It looked elegant, it looked calm. But deep underneath the long hood and polished trim sat a fire-breathing 454 cubic-inch V8, the same engine that powered some of Chevrolet's most brutal drag strip legends. This car did not need wild decals or spoiler kits to make its point. It was a gentleman's brawler. The Monte Carlo SS could roll silently through city streets, soaking up bumps with soft suspension and letting the driver recline in comfort. But one twitch of the accelerator, and everything changed. The engine woke up with a growl. The tires bit into the pavement. The plush personal luxury coupe became a full-fledged muscle machine, capable of shoving you back into your seat and leaving the competition behind. The SS package added heavy-duty suspension, beefier brakes, and a tighter feel overall. But it still maintained that smooth, upscale experience. It was a car for drivers who wanted the best of both worlds. Today, the Monte Carlo SS 454 is remembered for its dual identity: classy on the outside, chaos under the hood. It was the kind of car you could take to a formal event, then leave in a cloud of smoke and roaring exhaust. It was style, power, and surprise, all rolled into one unforgettable machine. The 1970 AMC Rebel machine was a shout in a room full of whispers. It did not just enter the muscle car scene, it kicked down the door and demanded attention. Drenched in patriotic red, white, and blue paint straight from the factory, it looked like a flag on four wheels. But it was more than just loud colors. Under that bulging hood scoop lived a 390 cubic inch V8 that pushed over 300 horsepower. And this car used every ounce of it. Designed for street dominance and track performance, the Rebel machine delivered acceleration that made even the biggest names nervous. It could run the quarter mile in under 14 seconds and looked proud doing it. The styling was bold and aggressive, with unique graphics and details that made it impossible to mistake for anything else. Inside, it was straightforward and functional, just what you wanted from a true muscle car. It did not pretend to be a luxury cruiser. It was all about performance and presence. The Rebel machine proved that AMC could build a serious contender, and it earned the respect of drivers who knew real muscle when they saw it. Today, it is celebrated as a rare and fearless piece of muscle car history, the underdog that never backed down, a car that wore its identity proudly and punched far above its weight. When it comes to bold statements, the Rebel machine was never afraid to speak the loudest. The 1971 Plymouth GTX was the kind of car that let you have it both ways: brutal performance paired with a refined interior. It was a high-end muscle car with real luxury touches, the kind of vehicle that wore a suit to the drag strip. Plymouth positioned the GTX as their gentleman's muscle car, and it lived up to that promise. Under the hood, buyers could choose from big, mean options like the 440 Super Commando or the legendary 426 Hemi, engines that made the GTX more than capable of laying down rubber with ease. It came standard with heavy-duty suspension, performance tires, and a torque-heavy driveline that made it as fast as it was smooth. But step inside, and you would find bucket seats, a wood-grain dash, and high-end trim details that felt more at home in a luxury coupe than a street racer. The body styling was sleek but muscular, with subtle badging and a wide stance that gave it real road presence. While other muscle cars chased shock value, the GTX delivered muscle with maturity. It was not about screaming the loudest. It was about walking in like you owned the place and proving it when the light turned green. Today, the 71 GTX is one of the most respected names from the era, remembered for combining raw strength with comfort and control. It showed that you could be fast without being flashy and dangerous without being loud. The 1973 Pontiac Ventura GTO is one of the most overlooked muscle cars of the decade, and maybe the most misunderstood. Built during a time when regulations were tightening and insurance premiums were skyrocketing, Pontiac had to get creative, so they took the compact Ventura body and tried to give it the soul of the GTO. On paper, it sounded promising. A small, lighter frame paired with a strong 350 cubic inch V8, dual exhaust, and rally suspension. It even had bold GTO badging, a sport-tuned interior, and a beefy stance. But it arrived in a time when performance was being choked by emissions equipment and rising costs. The Ventura GTO could move, but not like its fire-breathing predecessors. Still, for what it was, it offered a solid package: decent power, good handling, and classic Pontiac design. It had all the styling cues of a proper muscle car, from the hood scoop to the rally wheels. Inside, it had sporty trim, performance gauges, and a feel that was more driver-focused than you would expect from a compact. Unfortunately, the timing just was not right. It could not live up to the GTO nameplate in the eyes of purists, and as a result, it faded into obscurity. But today, that same reputation makes it one of the most unique cars of its time. The Ventura GTO was a final attempt to keep the muscle spirit alive in a changing world, and that deserves respect. The 1972 Chevrolet Nova SS 350 was proof that big things can come in smaller packages. It was a compact car by size, but there was nothing small about its performance. The Supersport badge on this Nova meant it was ready to deliver old-school muscle in a tighter, more affordable frame. The 350 cubic inch V8 provided solid horsepower, quick acceleration, and a deep growl that could hold its own at stoplights and strip runs alike. It was not the fastest car on the road, but it was quick enough to leave a lasting impression. The Nova SS was loved for its balance. It was light, nimble, and had just enough grunt to feel fast without scaring your wallet. It looked the part, too. With a cowl induction hood, rally wheels, and clean, aggressive body lines, the Nova SS had a no-nonsense appearance that told the world it meant business. Inside, it was simple but effective. Sporty bucket seats, straightforward gauges, and not much fluff. This was a muscle car for the everyday driver. Something you could take to work, take to the drag strip, and take home without feeling like you were making a compromise. Today, the Nova SS 350 is one of the best entry-level muscle cars you can still find from the era. It was not flashy, but it was fast, and that was more than enough. The 1971 Ford Mustang Mach 1 429 Super Cobra Jet was the kind of car that made no apologies. It looked mean, sounded mean, and drove like a hammer through the pavement. This was the Mustang pushed to its outer limit, built not just to look fast, but to dominate the quarter mile. Under the hood, the 429 cubic inch Super Cobra jet engine was the stuff of legend. High compression, solid lifters, a 4-barrel carburetor, and a rear axle built for hard launches. The Mach 1 with this package was a full-on street monster. It came with drag pack components, heavy-duty cooling, and a reputation for frightening the unprepared. But it was not just about muscle. The 71 Mustang was longer, lower, and wider than earlier models, giving it a fastback profile that oozed attitude. The sport hood, rear spoiler, honeycomb grille, and competition suspension all worked together to make this car feel like it belonged on a racetrack. Inside, it was part muscle, part GT cruiser, high-back bucket seats, wood trim, and enough gauges to make you feel like a pilot. The Mach 1 429 SCJ was not built for subtlety. It was built for speed, and for those who wanted the biggest, baddest Mustang of the era, it delivered. Today, it stands tall among the greats, a brutal, beautiful beast from a time when Ford dared to go all in. The 1974 Bricklin SV. One was one of the strangest, boldest, and most ambitious cars of the decade, and whether you loved it or laughed at it, you could not ignore it. Built in Canada and dreamed up by American entrepreneur Malcolm Bricklin, the SV1 was marketed as a safety sports car. It featured energy-absorbing bumpers, an integrated roll cage, and body panels made of acrylic bonded fiberglass, which made it resistant to rust. But let us be honest, what most people remember are those wild, upward-swinging gull-wing doors. The design was straight out of science fiction, and when those doors rose up in a parking lot, heads turned. Under the hood, the SV1 used a V8 engine, first from American Motors, then from Ford's 460. And while it was not the quickest car on the block, it had more than enough power to back up its exotic appearance. The interior was tight and a little underdeveloped, but you got a sense that this was a car built with passion. Production issues, cost overruns, and quality problems eventually sank the project, but the SV1 left its mark. Today, it is a cult classic, a rare, misunderstood rebel from the golden era of wild ideas. The Bricklin SV1 may not have been perfect, but it dared to be different, and that kind of courage still deserves a second look. The Oldsmobile Omega tried to be something it was not, a luxury car wrapped in a compact body. As part of GM's X-Body platform, it shared bones with the Chevrolet Nova, Pontiac Ventura, and Buick Apollo. But Oldsmobile gave it extra touches: padded vinyl, better trim, and a fancier badge. For buyers who wanted a touch of class without a big price tag, the Omega hit a sweet spot. It was quiet, comfortable, and dependable, if not exactly thrilling. The name itself suggested mystery and finality, but the car played it safe. And in doing so, it quietly filled the driveways of suburban neighborhoods across America. It was the car of second jobs, Sunday errands, and high school parking lots. But that low-key presence meant it never made a lasting splash. By the end of the decade, newer designs and more exciting options made it easy to overlook. Yet for the people who drove them, the Omega was steady and familiar. It may not have wowed the world, but it never needed to. The Chevrolet Vega rolled out with bold dreams. It was meant to be a compact car for a new era. Lightweight, efficient, stylish. And it had one headline feature, an aluminum engine that was supposed to revolutionize small car performance. But that engine turned out to be its undoing. It overheated, it warped, it failed. For many drivers, the Vega started as a promise and ended as a cautionary tale. Kids in the back seat might remember the smell of coolant more than the family vacations. Underneath its slick styling, the Vega simply was not built to last. Rust showed up like an uninvited guest. Head gaskets blew out without warning. What was supposed to be GM's forward-thinking marvel became a repair shop regular. Still, if you grew up in the 1970s, chances are you saw plenty of them on the road because they sold fast. Everyone knew someone who had a Vega. Maybe your neighbor, maybe your uncle, maybe your dad. And no matter how badly it ran, it was part of your daily backdrop. Parked at the curb, rattling down the road, or waiting in line at the drive-thru. The Vega was not just a car. It was a flawed dream on four wheels. The 1980 Buick Skylark was part of the infamous X-Body lineup, and it inherited every one of the platform's notorious issues. Like its sibling, the Chevrolet Citation, the Skylark was meant to modernize General Motors' compact car offerings. Instead, it became a case study in rushed engineering. Steering problems were frequent and dangerous, with some models pulling to one side unpredictably. Rust was another major issue, especially in northern climates. The interior was cramped and filled with hard, brittle plastics that cracked under sunlight. Buick tried to dress the car up with better trim and branding, but the mechanical flaws ran deep. Customers complained about vibrations, loose panels, and cheap-feeling controls. And while the car was supposed to be economical, its real-world fuel economy often disappointed. It also lacked the smooth ride and comfort Buick had once been known for. The brand's older buyers were confused by the compact form. Younger buyers saw better options from Japan. The Skylark of 1980 failed to appeal to either group. It was a car that tried to be everything and ended up as almost nothing. General Motors had hoped it would be a flagship for the future. Instead, it became an embarrassing reminder of what happens when a company cuts corners. The Pontiac Trans Am was pure attitude. It was the car you drew on your notebook during math class. It was the car that made you dream of open roads, mirrored sunglasses, and Burt Reynolds behind the wheel. Thanks to Smokey and the Bandit, the Trans Am became more than a muscle car. It became a pop culture legend. That screaming Firebird decal on the hood? Iconic. The T-top roof? Cooler than any convertible. And the engine under that shaker scoop was not just for show, it meant business. The Trans Am was loud, it was fast, and it had flair. Teenagers idolized it, adults respected it, and even people who never owned one still remember what it sounded like when it flew past on a summer night. It captured everything the 1970s stood for: freedom, rebellion, and just the right amount of recklessness. You did not drive a Trans Am quietly. You roared through the world and made sure it looked. The car might be parked today, but the feeling it gave you never left. The Buick. Skyhawk did not scream for attention, but maybe that was the point. When it arrived in the mid-1970s, it aimed to blend European inspiration with American sensibility. It was compact, cleanly styled, and powered by a V6 engine that offered decent pep without guzzling fuel. For Buick, a brand long associated with larger sedans and older buyers, the Skyhawk was something different. It targeted the young professional, the first-time buyer, or anyone who wanted a car that felt a little more modern without breaking the bank. It was not flashy, but it was practical. It had sharp lines, bucket seats, and just enough style to stand apart without being loud. But the Skyhawk's quiet charm worked against it in the long run. It never made a big splash, and when new models and designs arrived, it was quickly forgotten. Still, for those who drove one, it represented a turning point. It was the bridge between tradition and modernity, between the wide-bodied beasts of the past and the sleeker designs of the future. It came and went without much noise, but left a soft, memorable echo. The 1982 Chrysler Imperial wanted to bring old-school luxury into the digital age, but the transition was rocky. On the outside, it wore the sharp lines, boxy silhouette, and gleaming chrome trim that screamed old money prestige. It looked like something a retired executive would drive to a private golf club in Palm Springs. But on the inside, it was trying hard to be the future. Chrysler loaded the Imperial with one of the earliest digital dashboards, voice alerts, and a fuel injection system controlled by a primitive onboard computer. Unfortunately, none of it worked the way it should have. The electronic dash flickered. The fuel injection system was erratic. The engine stumbled and surged, leaving both drivers and mechanics confused and frustrated. At a time when Chrysler desperately needed a win, the Imperial felt like a bloated experiment. Reliability took a hit. Gas mileage was poor. And the ride, while soft, felt disconnected from the road, like floating on a sofa bolted to a shopping cart. Chrysler marketed the Imperial as a return to elegance, even offering special Frank Sinatra editions, complete with branded cassettes. But all the names and styling in the world could not hide the clunky mechanics and aging foundation underneath. Sales were slow, and buyers were not impressed. In trying to bridge the past and the future, the Imperial ended up stuck in a limbo of unfulfilled promises. It was a luxury car that no longer understood what luxury meant. The Volkswagen Super Beetle was small, but its presence was huge. You could spot it from a block away with its unmistakable round shape, bug-eyed headlights, and humming engine that sounded like nothing else. This was not just a car. It was a movement. Kids decorated them with peace signs, daisy stickers, and rainbow paint. Hippies loved them. College kids trusted them, and parents bought them because they just kept going. The Super Beetle was a little more refined than its earlier cousins. Longer front end, upgraded suspension, more space inside. But it still had the same charm. The clunky engine in the rear, the flimsy heat that never worked right, the glove compartment that always squeaked, and somehow that just made you love it more. You learned to drive stick in one. You fit 5 friends into one and still had room for a guitar. It was easy to fix, easy to park, and impossible to hate. It was not fast. It was not flashy, but it was faithful. The Super Beetle was the underdog you rooted for. It kept going when others broke down. And if you grew up in the 1970s, it probably carried your first memories of freedom, laughter, and long winding roads. The Dodge Dart Swinger was all attitude packed into a compact frame. While the base Dart was known as a sensible, dependable car, the Swinger trim brought something extra, something fun. It was a 2-door coupe with just enough flash to make teenagers turn their heads and parents quietly shake theirs. The vinyl roof, racing stripes, and loud colors were made to stand out. It was not trying to be a muscle car, but it borrowed just enough swagger to feel like one. With engine options that gave it a little bite, the Swinger held its own on the road. Affordable, customizable, and easy to maintain, it quickly became a favorite among younger drivers. For a few golden years, it was everywhere, at drive-ins, outside burger joints, and lined up at local high schools. But as the 1970s wore on, tastes shifted. Insurance rates went up, gas prices soared, and the fun, flashy Swinger quietly disappeared. Still, it left its mark. It was a car that let regular people feel just a little cooler, a little faster, and a lot more alive. Those who drove it remember every ride, and those who missed out still wish they had taken the wheel. The 1985 Yugo GF made headlines as the cheapest new car in America. But cheap came with a price, and the Yugo paid dearly. Built in the former Yugoslavia and imported with bold promises, it was meant to give cost-conscious buyers an entry into car ownership. But almost everything about the Yugo felt like a compromise too far. The engine was noisy, the transmission clunky, and interior trim came loose with the slightest touch. Reviewers described it as toy-like, unstable, and barely roadworthy. On the highway, it struggled to keep up. On hills, it begged for mercy. Repairs were frequent and frustrating, and many new owners regretted the purchase before their first oil change. It became a late-night comedy punchline and the butt of every bad car joke for decades. Some cars fade into obscurity. The Yugo earned infamy. It proved that cutting costs without care leads to one destination: failure. The Chevrolet Chevelle SS 454 was a monster hiding in plain sight. It looked like a mid-sized coupe, maybe something your neighbor would drive to work. But under the hood, it was anything but tame. With a massive 454 cubic inch V8 engine, it delivered the kind of power that turned green lights into launch pads. It rumbled, it growled, it roared. The SS badge was not just for show, it meant business. And in the 1970s, nothing said teenage rebellion like driving a car that could outrun nearly anything on the road. This was the kind of car your parents warned you about. It left black streaks on pavement and made your heart race just sitting at idle. The hood bulge, the stripes, the deep bucket seats, it all screamed speed. And even if you never had one, you dreamed about it. You had posters on the wall. You watched it tear up streets in movies. It was muscle in its purest form, the kind of car that made your foot heavy and your pulse quick. But the world was changing. Regulations crept in, insurance rates soared, and cars like the SS 454 began to disappear. Still, the legend lived on. And for anyone who was lucky enough to ride in one, that memory never left. The Ford Pinto will always be controversial. But before the headlines and lawsuits, it was just a cheap, cheerful little car that showed up on every corner in the 1970s. Designed to compete with foreign imports, the Pinto offered simplicity. It was small, affordable, and came in bright colors with a bubble-like shape that somehow made people smile. High schoolers loved it, parents appreciated the price, and for a while, it really was the people's car. But the Pinto's name became tied to something darker. A flawed gas tank design made rear-end collisions dangerous, sometimes fatal. Reports of fires made national news, and lawsuits followed. Ford's decision not to make immediate changes damaged its reputation for decades. Still, not every Pinto exploded. Millions were sold, and many ran just fine, ferrying families to drive-ins, beach trips, and first jobs. It is hard to separate the scandal from the sentiment, but both are part of the story. For better or worse, the Pinto was a symbol of its time. It was the gamble people took on a budget, the dream of mobility at a lower cost, the risk you accepted with every turn of the key. And even now, seeing one in the wild stops you in your tracks, not out of fear, but recognition. The 1980 Chevrolet Citation was General Motors' first big push into front-wheel drive, an effort to modernize its lineup and fight off foreign competition. But the launch was rushed, and the cracks showed almost immediately. Brake failures, rusted bodies, suspensions that collapsed under pressure, transmission issues dogged the early models, and misaligned steering columns made handling feel like guesswork. The Citation came out strong in sales, but quickly earned a reputation for unreliability. It was boxy, yes, but that was not the problem. The problem was that it felt unfinished. Cheap materials, inconsistent quality, and a driving experience that never inspired confidence. GM had marketed it as innovative, practical, and perfectly American. But buyers soon found themselves stuck with cars that shuddered, squeaked, and stalled. Lawsuits piled up, recalls followed, and the goodwill dried up fast. It even became a punchline in late-night comedy, symbolizing Detroit's worst instincts. What should have been a new chapter for Chevrolet became a footnote of frustration. The Citation did not just fail, it taught an entire generation not to trust promises stamped in chrome. The 1970 Cadillac Eldorado was not just a car, it was a statement. It measured over 18 feet long with lines that stretched on like highways themselves. Every inch was dipped in chrome. The front looked like it could bulldoze through time. And the ride? It was smoother than silence. The Eldorado was a front-wheel drive giant powered by a monstrous V8 engine. You did not just sit in it, you sank. Seats were wide enough to sleep on. The doors were so heavy they could bruise your pride, but you felt like royalty every time you closed them. Parking one took confidence. Turning one took patience. But cruising in an Eldorado felt like being untouchable. Kids in the back seat would disappear into its velour depths. Grandparents would whisper, "Now this is a car." It was the kind of vehicle you washed by hand, not because it needed it, but because it deserved it. And even though gas prices and practicality would soon shove land yachts off the road, the Eldorado left a permanent impression. It was big, it was bold, and it was absolutely unforgettable. The 1980 Dodge Aspen and Plymouth Volare were holdovers from the previous decade, and by the 1980s, they were embarrassments. Built on aging platforms and clinging to outdated design, these cars were already struggling when the new decade rolled in. Known for catastrophic rust problems, failing suspensions, and erratic quality control, the Aspen and Volare had earned a bad reputation even before the first 1980 models rolled off the line. Dodge and Plymouth tried to extend their lifespans with cosmetic tweaks, new grills, paint schemes, maybe an optional trim package, but the core problems never went away. Engines sputtered and stalled. Carburetors needed constant adjustment. The interiors, filled with brittle plastics and peeling vinyl, degraded faster than the warranty expired. Road noise was loud, steering was vague, and every mile felt like a negotiation with fate. Meanwhile, Japanese imports were getting better every year, more reliable, more efficient, and far more modern. Buyers could feel how far behind they were just sitting in the driver's seat. Still, Chrysler seemed unwilling to admit defeat. Advertising promised value and tradition, but the truth was hard to hide. Eventually, they had no choice. The Aspen and Volare were quietly retired, two relics of a time the industry wanted to forget. Today, they rarely show up at car shows, auctions, or nostalgia pages, because unlike some failures that inspire affection, these ones just wore out their welcome. The Ford Maverick Grabber was not quite a muscle car, but it sure wanted to be. With its bold decals, spoiler, and optional V8 engine, the Grabber trim of the Maverick aimed squarely at young drivers hungry for speed and style on a budget. Introduced in the early 1970s, it captured a moment in time when flash still mattered and performance was a mindset, even if the horsepower did not quite measure up. Its aggressive looks gave it personality. The compact size made it easy to handle, and it came in colors loud enough to be heard before it even started. The Grabber let you dream a little bigger, even if you were driving something small. But like many cars of its era, it was caught between a changing culture and tighter regulations. Gas prices climbed, emissions rules tightened, and what once felt cool started to feel impractical. By the end of the decade, the Grabber faded out. But for those who drove one, or wanted to, it remains a symbol of rebellion in a shrinking world. A reminder that sometimes attitude is everything. The 1987 Cadillac Alante was a high-stakes gamble meant to take on the world's best luxury roadsters. Designed in Italy by Pininfarina and airshipped to the United States for final assembly, the Alante had the pedigree, the style, and the marketing budget of a superstar. But what it did not have was execution. Under the hood, it ran on a front-wheel drive Cadillac platform and was powered by an engine that could not match the car's price tag or visual promise. The ride was stiff, the electronics were unreliable, and the digital dashboard was ahead of its time in all the wrong ways. It was not just overpriced, it was outgunned. For the same money, buyers could get a Mercedes-Benz SL with proven reliability and rear-wheel performance. Cadillac tried to sell the Alante as a fusion of European style and American comfort, but what buyers got was an awkward hybrid that was neither comfortable enough nor sporty enough. Sales were sluggish, repairs were costly, and every attempt to revise or improve the model came too late. In the end, the Alante became a luxury car that chased a dream but never caught it. It was supposed to put Cadillac back on the map. Instead, it became a dot on the side of the road. The Datsun 240Z was the first time a lot of Americans realized Japan could build a real sports car. Sleek, low-slung, and surprisingly affordable, it looked like it belonged in Europe, but it cost a fraction of the price. That was the magic. It gave you the styling of a Ferrari, the reliability of a Datsun, and a driving experience that punched way above its weight. It had a straight-six engine, rear-wheel drive, and a gearbox that made you feel like a hero with every shift. And the best part? It actually worked. No electrical gremlins, no leaky carbs, just clean, confident power in a lightweight body. You could carve corners in it, you could drive it to work, you could take it on road trips, and you always got a second look at the gas station. The 240Z sold like crazy because it delivered on everything it promised. For a generation that was growing tired of bulky American coupes, it was a breath of fresh air. The import wave had arrived, and it was wearing a Datsun badge. The 1984 Ford EXP was supposed to be a sporty two-seater version of the Ford Escort, a compact car reimagined for young drivers looking for flair. But the EXP ended up with none of the performance and even less personality. The engine was weak, especially compared to the Sportier coupes coming out of Japan at the time. The handling was sluggish, the steering vague, and the road feel uninspired. For a car marketed as bold and different, it looked oddly dull. Ford tried hard to pitch it as a fun commuter car, sleek, affordable, and modern. But in reality, it felt more like a lonely Escort missing its back seat. It lacked excitement. It lacked buzz. Even the advertising could not figure out what the EXP was trying to be. Some versions added a turbo, but it was too little, too late. Consumers shrugged, sales tanked, and just a few years later, the model disappeared with barely a whisper. Even among Ford enthusiasts, the EXP has no cult following. The EXP was not a disaster because it did something wrong. It was a disaster because it never did anything right. It promised a thrill and delivered a yawn. The AMC Hornet Sportabout was not just a station wagon, it was a style statement. Launched in the early 1970s, the Sportabout was AMC's answer to a world that needed utility, but craved flair. With its compact size and distinctive profile, it stood apart from the bulky wagons of the past. And then, in an unexpected twist, Gucci got involved. Yes, that Gucci. The fashion house teamed up with AMC to design a limited edition Sportabout complete with designer interiors, pinstriping, and branded badging. It was bold, it was bizarre, and it worked, at least for a little while. The Sportabout was reliable, versatile, and surprisingly fun to drive. Families loved it. Urban professionals appreciated the compact utility, but by the end of the 1970s, the wagon era was fading. SUVs were rising. Flash was no longer enough. Still, the Hornet Sportabout remains one of the few cars that can say it had real fashion cred. It may not be in museums or car shows, but in the memories of those who drove it, it is unforgettable. The Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme was the car that made you feel like you made it, even if you still lived paycheck to paycheck. It had style, reliability, and just enough flair to feel upscale without being out of reach. Your uncle probably had one. Your dad definitely talked about one. Your neighbor waxed his every Saturday. This was the car of the working class with a touch of class. The Supreme trim gave you soft seats, chrome trim, and a vinyl top that made it feel like a personal luxury coupe, and it rode like butter, smooth, quiet, confident. It was the kind of car you took to weddings, to graduation, or just to the grocery store, but you always looked good doing it. It was not flashy like a Corvette or wild like a Trans Am, but it had presence. You respected the person who drove a Cutlass. They made smart choices. And under the hood, it had enough muscle to surprise you at a stoplight. For years, it was one of the best-selling cars in America. And when you saw one parked at the curb, you knew the owner had good taste. The Cutlass Supreme was steady, stylish, and always dependable. The 1985 Merkur X R4 Ti was Ford's bold experiment to bring European performance to American buyers, but it tripped on its own branding before it even left the lot. Sold under the unfamiliar Merkur name, this sporty import came with a turbocharged engine, rear-wheel drive, and edgy styling. On paper, it had the right ingredients, but the name meant nothing to most buyers, and the strange pronunciation confused everyone. Worse, it was sold only through select Lincoln Mercury dealers who often had no idea how to market or service it. Parts were expensive and hard to source, maintenance was tricky, and the turbo lag made city driving a chore. Enthusiasts appreciated the rally-inspired chassis and the hatchback practicality, but the average American car shopper did not know what they were looking at, and quickly stopped caring. Reviews were mixed, support from Ford was lukewarm, and by the time anyone figured out how to spell the name, the car was gone. It lasted just a few short years before being phased out. The Merkur XR4 Ti was not a bad car. It was a misplaced one. A European idea dropped into a market that just was not ready. Or maybe, Ford just got tired of trying to explain what it was. If these muscle cars brought back memories, drop your favorite in the comments and hit subscribe for more forgotten gems.